We're here with Sean Cahill, and I'm going to let Sean do an introduction for himself. But I just want to say, Sean, thank you so much for being here. I know I'm running a really small YouTube channel here, and you're doing some really big things on the History Channel, so your time is greatly appreciated. Just wanted to welcome you to the program. What we have here is a YouTube channel almost exclusively dedicated to covering the Beaver, Utah UAP. I saw on Twitter that you had liked one of the videos about the Utah UAP, saw that you had some interest in it, connected with you, was really honored that you expressed interest to talk about it, knowing that you're a super busy guy and you have a lot of experience in this field. I figured a good place to start would be your background, how you got into the UAP field. Also wanted to thank you for your service because I know you served in the Navy.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here, Brian. It was really great to connect with you. Well, we know each other, as you said, via the Utah UAP, but most people know me because I was stationed on board the USS Princeton in 2004 during what's become known as the Nimitz Tic-Tac incident. I was the officer of the deck on board the USS Princeton during certain watch rotations when we encountered the Tic-Tacs throughout that period of our workup in 2004. And had been communicating with Kevin Day, the senior chief radar operator down in the Combat Information Center, about ship movements and other things to coordinate us vectoring in on those anomalous contacts that Kevin had locked on radar and was communicating back and forth with the Nimitz about. At the time that I was on the bridge, I wasn't aware of of what Kevin was looking at. And it wasn't until after the fact when I was able to witness the video that we've all seen since on History's Unidentified and the TTSA released via Luis Elizondo's resignation from ATIP, et cetera. But that's a quick and dirty as to who I am and how we got here. Let me add that it was my pleasure to serve. It was always my choice and my honor to do so.
Well, thank you, Sean. Thanks for sharing. And again, thanks for your service. For those who aren't so well informed, I think a lot of the viewers on this channel will have known about the Nimitz encounter. But if you don't mind, I'm sure you've told the story a million times, but if you wouldn't mind just going into a little bit more context about what happened, what those Tic-Tacs were, and what your actual involvement or experience was as an eyewitness.
There are some interesting questions in there. Well, we'd been out on a workup in, it was around November 14th, I believe, was the approximate date, 2004. We were on workups, as we call them, off the coast of Southern California and Baja, Mexico. I was the chief master at arms on board the USS Princeton. I was the chief petty officer, and my rating was master at arms, and that is basically military police for the United States Navy, but it has a kind of a broader umbrella that it falls under. The master at arms are also in charge of anti-terrorism, visit board search and seizure, inspections, cleanliness, a lot of different things that occur on board the ship. At the time, I was also serving a collateral duty as a conning officer and junior officer of the deck, which was kind of out of my swim lane, per se. I was doing it for advancement opportunities and to be seen at the command. So that was why I was where I was at the time. So it's not that the bridge crew are not all trained observers. They are, but they're each up there. Some cross-trained in numerous areas, but mostly they're stovepiped into specific lanes, and they come together as a team to operate the battle plan. I was up there also as a trained investigator, law enforcement officer, and as a chief petty officer. I was one of the only chief petty officers that was serving in watch rotation on the bridge. And if you served in the United States Navy, you know that the chief petty officer is a different cut of cloth from the rest of the sailors. There's a different process that's involved after you've been selected via peer review. So all of these things came together on board the bridge of the Princeton that week. As we've discussed it, and myself and some of my friends, that it was just unusual, the people that were where they were. Whether it was Commander Fravor and his wingman, or Senior Chief Day, or Gary Voorhees, or Jason Turner, or other people that were paying attention, all of those people were exactly where they were at the time they needed to be to see what they saw. Kevin had been communicating with me from down in the Combat Information Center via what we called the POTS line, a plain old telephone system, as we would call it. So it was really just two guys who knew each other well chatting on the phone, with him saying, "Hey, will you turn the ship this way? Will you do this?" He was trying to run to ground some issues that he had on the radar, and that was all that I really knew. I didn't realize it was as interesting as it was at the time. But we had enough room to maneuver, no pun intended, that I was able to move the ship about as needed to aid in what Kevin needed. Throughout that week, if I recall correctly, we had kind of a set watch rotation in that I think I may have had the same watch every night. I'm not 100% clear on that, but I recall having night watch almost that entire underway. And I just remember a lot of unusual requests from Kevin, asking me to have my lookouts go out on the bridge wings and scan for air contacts when we weren't having an air exercise, asking me to turn the ship in directions that just didn't make sense to me at the time. But I really wasn't going to give Kevin a hard time. So the night before we saw the videos that are now world famous, I had been out on the portside bridge wing after Kevin had called me and asked me to really take seriously getting out there and looking with the lookouts, putting my eyes on the sky and everything else. He wanted me to, he wasn't kidding. So I knew that whatever this was, he was going to explain it to me later when we had a chance. And so I took it quite seriously. I went out and spoke to each of the lookouts and made sure that they knew how to scan properly, that they understood their equipment, that they were qualified, which is something we do anyway, but I put a little bit more effort into it that evening. And I was on the portside bridge wing looking about 45 degrees in the sky, scanning from the port beam up forward, when at about 45 degrees up in the sky, there was a constellation of 5 to 7 stars. And it's almost involuntary that my hand goes in the air every time to describe it. I spent 20 years in the Navy, not all of that deployed, but quite a bit of it in transit across the Pacific, back and forth. And a lot of that on watch at night and during the day. And you get to know distances, you get to know constellations. I was learning to navigate using a sextant and other things. So at the time, I was well versed in what the sky looked like around us. I knew where we were in the sea. I knew at any given point what direction we were pointed, literally by the compass. So when I saw something unusual, I knew that I was seeing something unusual. And I saw 5 to 7 stars move counterclockwise toward a center point, and each of them start blinking out. And I'd never seen anything like it. It didn't fit with any of the numerous meteoroids I'd seen in my life. It didn't fit with the Shoemaker-Levy comet that I had witnessed from Guam when I was stationed there, satellites, missile launches, aircraft of every kind, from the B-2 all the way down to World War II aircraft, drones, etc. I'm not one of those people that in general thinks that I would know. I don't consider myself, in that if there were some major thing going on, I would have been told. At the time, I thought that as the chief law enforcement officer on board, that if this was a threat, that we would have looked at it differently, but I'll get to that portion. Okay. After I saw those lights do what they did, I was flabbergasted. I turned to the lookout next to me and I said, "Did you see that?" And we use saltier language, but I said, "Did you see that?" And he opened mouth, just nodded, "Yes, Chief." And I went back inside. I walked over to the other bridge wing, the other lookout, and I think I just kind of went in and went on the bridge and just kind of contemplated what I saw, because I really wasn't sure what it was. The next morning, I woke up in my rack and went out to breakfast in the chief's mess. And the chief's mess is a separate area in the ship. The chief petty officers, pay grade E7 through E9, senior chiefs and master chiefs. We sleep separately from the rest of the crew, from the officers and the junior enlisted. We dine separately. We're a very tight-knit fraternal organization, men and women. I know my words are failing me right now. I don't know the sorority.
Co-ed fraternity.
Yeah, co-ed. Yeah, co-ed. But it's really tight-knit group. And we don't BS. I mean, we don't pull our punches. Anyone behind those doors can speak to each other in any manner that they see fit to get the mission done. We check our egos at the door. We check our pay grade at the door, and it's very rare that you'll ever see someone, get up on their tiptoes on someone else. We get the job done in there, and when we walk out, we're a united team. And I came out to breakfast and said, what the F do you guys have me doing up there on the bridge? You got me running out back and forth looking for things in the sky when we're supposed to be looking for submarines. We're in different exercises. What's going on? And Kevin had the biggest grin on his face that I'd ever seen. And Kevin's just an incredibly charming and jovial guy. And I think a lot of us have seen him in a really serious way because of this subject. But Kevin was always the guy to bring a smile to the room. And Kevin had an ear-to-ear smile. And his partner was a little bit more gruff. And his partner told me to go check my effing email. And wouldn't tell me anything. And so I went in the back into our lounge and booted up the SIPRnet, which is where we communicate secret information. It's basically just for people who don't operate with classified material, it's a more stringently monitored internet that the government uses throughout the world. The video speaks for itself, but before I got to the video at the bottom of the email, there was a chain of emails between our operations officer, Lieutenant Commander Teresa Elders, who has since passed. But she and the operations officer on board the USS Nimitz were discussing all of the possibilities that you can imagine that professionals would discuss for what they were picking up on the radar, whether it was flocks of birds, temperature inversions. They had all of their we have a specified rating in the United States Navy that is weather person. We have meteorologists specifically in the United States Navy. That's all they do is give the weather report each day. And you'd be surprised to find out that weather can be classified. But
when would it be?
If you don't want the bad guys to know first, I guess. If
storm's coming and it might work to your disadvantage or advantage.
Sure, but it's interesting that. Well, I think that actually, it's more so that uninteresting information gets slid in with classified information is probably what really happens. But they really tried to work it out. Two professionals who knew what they were talking about. They knew that they were talking about UFOs. They got a quick little joke out in the beginning, if I recall, and then they spent a huge chain of emails trying to work this out amongst professionals, well-educated professionals, and they were flabbergasted. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. I thought it was really neat. I was laughing, and then I got to the bottom and I saw the video. And as anybody who's seen that video, and many of us who have seen the Utah UAP that we're going to talk about, there's nothing like it. There's no comparison. It's not something that fits the paradigm. And so I have to be honest that evening changed my life. The following evening, not necessarily seeing the object or seeing the video. Up until that moment, I'd been a fan of UFOs, science fiction. I was a complete geek. I'd had my own experiences and sightings in my life. I was aloof to it, but I was interested and open-minded. But that night at our operations and intelligence briefing, it didn't seem like anybody really cared. One of the cryptologic technicians spoke to me and wanted to let me know that they would have one of their personnel at the door, just checking clearances, eyeballing faces and making sure that they still had a current clearance on the list, because some people's lapse due to timing or they have an interim clearance that doesn't last as long. And our briefings were usually, they involved the ship's movements throughout the next couple of days, whatever exercises we were involved with. And again, we were just off the coast in workup, so this was pretty laid back. Now, no one was kicked out of the meeting, or nobody gave them any flack that they needed to call the cops to come assist. But I was sitting on the couch in between a young officer and another chief when a lieutenant started the briefing for the evening. And this was 2004, so it was pretty unsophisticated by today's measure. It was PowerPoint with very limited graphics on a Windows NT system. So, but as soon as he said slide, a little graphic of a like a Mars Attacks alien in a classic saucer with a little dome and a little green man shoots across the screen, and everybody has a good laugh. About half the room erupts in laughter, and the other half's looking around, not getting the joke. And so about 30 seconds goes by where people are whispering, "Oh, they think they saw a UFO," or somebody saw something, or there's a video on the SIPRNet. And then the captain said, "Well, we've all had our fun the last couple days. Let's move on," or something to that effect. And that was it. We talked about it a little bit in the Chiefs mess. Kevin and I certainly talked about it. I had conversations on the bridge with some of the younger sailors on watch about it. You know, they wanted to know what it was. Some of the other guys had seen it. I'm pretty sure, looking back, Jason and I probably talked about it. I know Gary had told me that he had went outside the skin of the ship at some point and looked at it through the big eyes, which are literally a giant set of binoculars. And that he got a very good look at it. I only looked at it through a regular set of Bushnell binoculars that we had for the bridge crew, which I actually am still in possession of. The way that we reacted on board that ship left me cold. I examined it, and all I could think, with all my training and all of the knowledge that I had, to include the knowledge that I had of the zeitgeist of ufology, let's say. This seemed like the most significant sighting that I could have imagined. This seemed to pale in comparison to anything that I had ever seen on television, read about in a book, or anything like that. And when we didn't take it seriously, I've never really discussed it like this, but I really felt like I only had two choices. I could be the person to go talk about it, or I could assume cognizant authority had this covered. And I wasn't at a spot in my life where I was ready to give up my career and my livelihood over this. There was no way that I could go anywhere with it. I didn't consider myself a whistleblower. I didn't consider this. We weren't in an era of whistleblowers either. The way that we reacted gave me confidence in our ability to defend ourselves, but it stole the heart out of the magic in the universe for me. I thought that if my senior chain of command reacted so nonchalantly to this, they must have had foreknowledge of it. And if they had foreknowledge of it, then this wasn't what I thought it was, and I had nothing to worry about.
So I have a lot of questions, but the first is, where are you on this right now? Do you feel as if, you know, the more senior people on the ship knew what was actually taking place, and that's why they reacted this way? Do you think it was a mystery and they covered up because they had no better answers, or because they were informed to? Where do you stand right now?
You know, if you had asked me in 05 or 06, that's what I would have told you. I would have agreed with everything you just said. And if you'd asked me, shoot, the last time you and I talked, I don't even think I was sure. I've had a chance in the last 2 years have been incredibly interesting. But the last 6 months, with some of the new people I've gotten to meet, the amount of information that I've been, of personal opinion of other people and official, the way things are seen by some people in an official capacity, have really changed the way that I see things. And I personally don't believe that it would have been possible in 2004 for any entity of the United States government that we are aware of, let alone a foreign entity from another government, or even a conglomerate of major multinational corporations. We've since broken down how fast we believe it was going, some of the ways that it operated, and frankly, I would throw to Lou on that, because he ran ATIP. They developed the 5 observables. I'm just, that's me parroting their amazing data. But the fact is that I cannot wrap my head around how we could have in 04 gotten to the point where we had moved that far forward in physics, in metallurgy, in everything that we've speculated would go along with making a Tic-Tac move. I can't see how that would have been us.
Do you know if the video footage you saw was taken the same day that you witnessed the
Hmm.
six stars blinking out?
I have I can't say that I know. I would have because I without seeing a watch bill for that week, because I wasn't one of those people you see in the movies that keeps personal logs of their time in the service or anything like that. So and the even though technically the handwritten watch bill for that evening should still exist and we should be able to verify what schedule I was on and et cetera, that would probably be just a ridiculous wild goose chase to try to find. But I know that I was on watch it at night when I saw what I saw. And I believe that um, I can't remember the name of the pilot that took the video. It wasn't Commander Fravor or his wingman. What they saw and what they encountered was a different incident than what we see on the video. But it was definitely within a 36-hour period.
It's okay. So they're tracking these objects on radar.
Hmm.
It's picked up on video.
Hmm.
You saw it in person.
Hmm.
Commander Fravor saw it in person.
Hmm. His wingman,
His wingman saw it in person.
Gary Voorhees, and then I believe the two other witnesses, Jason Turner witnessed. I believe he claims to have witnessed a longer video in the in what's called SES, the signal exploitation space on board. And I believe there's a gentleman from the Nimitz, but I don't know him personally.
Got it. Well, that's why I was really excited to have you specifically, because I've heard so much from Commander Fravor. I think so many people have. There are also, animations reenacting the Tic-Tac that he saw. I've never seen anything reenacting what you saw, and there's no video behind that either. So I kind of see your perspective on the Nimitz encounter to be unique in that sense that it's sort of underreported. I'm just curious, what more you can share about those stars that you saw, and why do you refer to them as stars?
Well, interestingly enough, History Channel did an incredible job of animating my description of what I saw.
Take that back.
Yeah, it's okay. In episode 3 of Unidentified, they represented my memory absolutely accurately, and I was floored when I saw that. And what I provided them was a verbal account, some diagrams, some angles from where I was on the ship and things like that. And they literally pulled that memory out of my head and put it on the screen. So if anybody wants to see really what it looked like, what they showed in episode 3 of Unidentified was absolutely what I saw. Now, the reason I call them stars was because they were. So let's set baseline for a second. Not everybody is an amateur astronomer, which I would consider myself. I've been a telescope owner numerous times throughout my life. It's been a amateur hobby of mine. Cosmology, physics, and all of those things, I'm totally armchair, but I'm familiar with them. Now, I know that not everybody is, but I'm one of those folks that if we go out, I can probably tell you what constellation we're looking at, what major planets or stars are in the sky. I can find north in an instant, etc. So I'm very comfortable with the sky. I've been craning my neck up at it for 47 years now. I can't remember a time in my life when I wasn't looking up, and neither can my friends or family. But there was a constellation of stars hanging there. Like if you're familiar with the Pleiades, for example, if astronomers understand it, it's been called the Seven Sisters for a very long time. I believe there's actually 9 stars in the constellation, but 2 of them are occluded. But it's a tight grouping of stars, and I keep doing that same thing. But they weren't multicolored. They were white. They weren't dazzling. They were fixed brightness. There were no navigational lights. There was no strobing. They were single pointed. Well, I call them stars because they were in the sky. I mean, I guess that's probably the best way to put it. I think I'm nuking this.
But they disappeared.
Right.
So you must have been like, oh, what are these stars doing? This isn't usual star behavior. These can't be stars. At some point, you must have.
All of that went through my head at once because what I didn't mention earlier was that it was a relatively cloudless night. When I say relatively cloudless, there were wisps, but they could have been 40 degrees that way or 60 degrees this way. Where I was looking was um, completely cloudless. And so if you live in a major city, even a rural area, it doesn't compare to what pitch black 3 o'clock in the morning looks like in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with no land or any lights. And if you're in a darkened ship capacity where we've turned off all of our navigational lights for an exercise, um, the arm of the Milky Way stretches out across the sky. I mean, you can see the dust clouds in the interstellar medium, and it's not just the stars from your backyard. So when you walk out and you see something in your environment that is completely changed, and a transit across the Pacific Ocean from San Diego, say, to Hawaii, you even an uneducated navigator, someone who just wants to go out and look at the sky every night and try to figure it out on their own, they're going to be able to see the patterns as we move. And so you really get used to your environment out there. And so I have no doubt that what I saw didn't fit any of the things that I had been trained to see militarily, as aircraft, as weapon systems. And it didn't fit anything I had ever learned in my personal life about astronomy, cosmology, etc. So it was 100% brand new in my world.
What is the working theory right now, or is there a working theory about what was happening around the Nimitz?
Well, that depends on who you're asking. Now, I can't point at cognizant authority that can say what it was. Everyone that I know that I would turn to says we don't know. Says that it was anomalous, and that it maneuvered in a manner that we are unable to maneuver our craft, that it was definitely solid. It showed up on radar. We have it on the visual spectrum. We have it on the in the infrared portion of the spectrum. So we know that a physical object was there. And we have radar return data that this physical object moved in a manner that fits the 5 observables that Mr. Elizondo and the ATIP team developed. So that's information that we have now since TTSA and Lou have brought that to us. In the interim, there was no discussion because no one knew about it. So all the data that we have is literally what we all see, what has been reported. There is no behind the scenes, here's what it is. Even amongst the people that I know well, there are plenty of opinions. There's plenty of, when I say that we'll spitball it, we're super careful about that. We're even careful about that amongst my friends when it's just us, because we don't want to clutter up our worldview with too much bias.
Sure. Okay, so getting, I guess, to a more specific question and a working theory around that, both Commander Fravor and his wingmen observed a disturbance in the water roiling over what looked to be maybe a craft submerged in the water below the Tic-Tac. Is the working theory that these were two different crafts, two different phenomena, and that they were interacting with each other, or was this potentially just one craft?
Again, without assigning, I don't want to say theory. I'll say my working theory. Absolutely, yeah. That I'll take responsibility for that theory and say I think that's kind of obvious. Now, when I say that's obvious, that's also taken from the fact that I've been down to Baja with Lou. We've got hours and hours of eyewitness testimony, and you got to remember that when you see a gentleman say "la luz" in Espanol, he's just that's an exclamation for television. There was a 2-hour interview. There was data that was collected, but so much data has been collected that you can't present it all at once. And it just wouldn't make sense. It has to be in context. And the roiling in the water, the elongated shape that seemed to be there, other craft around it that seemed to be tenders to the larger craft. All of these things are echoed throughout all of the testimony that I've heard. All of the eyewitness accounts, and when I say all of them, all of the ones that were ocean related, that were fishermen or pilots, they're all consistent with the same few different shapes of craft, the entry and exit from the water, seemingly without changing the medium. The roiling of the water, as we describe it, is interesting, and a lot of people have speculated on that. I don't want to go too far into that. I leave that to the physicists and other folks who can actually put a good reason behind it. But it's consistent across the board with the geographical area. So there's a lot of interesting large things coming in and out of the water around down there, it seems.
I know you're hesitant to speculate, and I respect you not wanting to, but
I don't mind if we're going to say we're speculating, though.
Well, you've thought so much about this. I'm just curious what, if you gun to your head, what do you think was happening under the water? Do you think this was, like a mothership rendezvousing with its little drones?
So, all right. There's been enough inserted into the zeitgeist that I feel more comfortable not being the first person to talk about some of these things. A lot of, I believe Commander Fravor reported that, and I could be wrong about this, but one of the pilots reported that it appeared to have some kind of antenna. Some of us believe that they look like little, like feet almost, like little line-drawn feet. Danny Silva of Silver Record has some excellent animations on his website that show that as well from the testimony. Now, I wanted to know what those were. They didn't seem to make any sense. There seemed to be aspects of the Tic-Tac that lend to the fact that a smooth shell seems to be very important. So anything breaking out of that shell to me speaks to me. And so the first thing that I recognized was that it reminded me of one of the antenna on my father's B-17 in World War II. We could do a whole nother show on my dad saw Foo Fighters over Europe while in the Army Air Corps. That's a whole nother can of worms there. But it really reminded me of the antenna that they had on the aircraft. And I was an aerospace nerd as a kid, knew everything about my dad's aircraft. So I went online, started looking it up, looked up why aircraft had what are called loop antenna, how the distance between the loop antenna can tell you about the frequency, and just there were other aspects of it that spoke to me, that this craft was being probably controlled remotely. And the idea that it was around something. Now, when they said 747, they said the size of a 747. No one has ever said, "Oh yeah, but it was a different shape." No one has ever said that. All of us, it seems, who ever discuss it, assume that this was a wingless tube. And I don't know why we all seem to have that idea, but whenever we discuss it, that seems to be where we go. So that fits the eyewitness testimony if that's the case. So we've got a long cigar shape with zipping Tic-Tacs around it that encounter a couple that are doing something that they may have been busy. It may have, in the Navy, we have evolutions. We call them evolutions when we do something new, whether we're taking on fuel from another vessel or taking on stores or having a weapons test. We have operational risk management involved. We get together first and we say, how did people get hurt in the past? How are we going to keep them from getting hurt tomorrow? And is everybody aware of the game plan? And when you're locked on to that kind of evolution, when people can lose life or limb, or you could crash two ships into one another and cause catastrophic damage to life and property, you get tunnel vision and hyper-focused. I can't imagine that transiting a large craft from the ocean into the atmosphere with numerous hypersonic tenders around you is something that you do in a casual manner. So I think they got snuck up on. And I think that we got really lucky. And I think that there's a reason that we didn't have hours and hours of footage of them at that time. But whatever was controlling those craft seemed intelligently controlled by all observation, and seemed to not want to be bothered after the initial contact. So the big question is the who, and that's the speculation that while it's really fun to do over a couple of beers, who has any background for that?
Do the antenna, though, lead you to believe that this could be more manufactured than, from another universe?
Well, I can't imagine another universe where they wouldn't have to manufacture it.
I should say manufactured locally.
Sure. Yeah. At first, I thought to myself, I thought I was pretty clever, and I thought, oh, what if this is us? What if we figured out this much, but we still got to stick antennas out of this thing?
Right. It seems like a clunky design for such a otherwise slick interface.
But then I started thinking about, so I'll tell you the hardest part. So this is an admission for me in a way that in the last couple of years, my investigations, they can really lead you down a rabbit hole. If you really want to try to understand this, you have to put kind of a neutral filter on it and pour everything through it. Some of it is considered occult by some people. Some of it's considered paranormal by some people, but there's something about all of these weird things in our reality that seem to coincide around this phenomenon. Not specifically the 2004 incident with the Tic-Tac. I have no paranormal recollection of anything going on at that time, but that also wasn't something that, I didn't perceive things like that in my world as being a possibility necessarily at the time either. But
and do you now? Has that changed since?
It has. One of the things that I've been most hesitant to admit to, but if you follow me on Twitter or if you've seen my YouTube channel, I'm an experiencer, and that's a tough thing to look the camera right in the eye and say. But I continue to experience the phenomenon. I have what I believe to be my own video evidence in a few different areas of the spectrum, visible and infrared. I've had interesting run-ins in consciousness that, again, if you're not a meditator, if you're not somebody who's comfortable with your being alone with yourself, without anything to entertain you, talking about things occurring in consciousness can sound weird. But I think all of us have had dreams before. All of us have had dreamlike experiences that may or may not have felt more real than real, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so I would say to anybody that is immediately turned off by people discussing changes in consciousness or being an experiencer, I would say just consider your own experiences for a moment. I turned my garage into like a little command center about 8 months ago, and that was, whiteboard in the background and all my research material, and I'd carved out a little spot where I could really dig into this. I'm retired. I'm a house husband. I'm a filmmaker now, and so my time is up to me to how I utilize it. And I filled my whiteboard with every memory that I had of weird over the course of my life. Every brush with death. Every really interesting moment, whether they be large owls, that appeared when my friends and I were at a pivotal moment in our friendship, or or things we had seen in the sky. I made a lot of phone calls to people that I had been with during those times and found out that we had very different recollections. Not that we thought different things had occurred, but a good example is an old friend of mine that was the drummer in our band in high school. We witnessed a green football, as we call it, streak across the sky over the Mount Hamilton Observatory in San Jose around, oh shoot, it was right after we graduated, so it was 1991. My recollection of that was that we went up the next 2 blocks to my house, and that he went into the dining room and I went into the living room. My family was otherwise out of town, and we both sketched what we saw and wrote an account on the back of the paper, and then traded it and realized that we had seen the same thing. We both considered ourselves scientists. We didn't want to taint the data even when we were teenagers. Calling him up months back, he recalls that we drove over the mountain, down into the valley, and all the way up Mount Hamilton to the observatory, chasing this thing the whole time. I have no recollection of that. Now I'm a guy that rocks a man bun. I've got tattoos. I wear beads. I meditate. I live in California. That's going to set baseline for who I am for a lot of people. But I am still such a regular dude that loves to play sports, loves to laugh, loves to play pranks, loves to swear and drink beer. I'm still just a dude. And I don't know what to do with information like that. And that's led me to really consider so many different aspects of this and talk to people differently and realize that I haven't met anyone yet who hasn't seen something or experienced something in their life. But the great majority of us are really frightened to talk about it. We're really frightened how others are going to see us after we say it. And we really want to hear a lot of other people admit it first, it seems like. So when I'm in a group of people now, and because of what they've seen, and that they can see that I'm not scared to talk about this anymore. I'm not unstable. I'm not having aberrations in consciousness that are affecting the people around me or destroying my life. And normal guy. It gives them a certain confidence and courage to speak up. I'm really hoping that turns into a sea change. I'm really hoping that we can start turning to our families, and especially our elders, our grandparents, and our parents, and start asking them, "Hey, what have you seen? What's been weird for you before?" Because I don't think that this is going to get necessarily more logical as we go on. Because I can't find cognizant authority to really question for the deep answers.
Right. Why do you think it's so uncomfortable for most people to talk about anything beyond, the monotony of their daily life? Just to get into the very idea of consciousness, I think, is enough for people. And then you start talking about things that they don't even maybe accept as part of consciousness, like extraterrestrial life or other dimensions or.
Yeah. I think I run the risk here of alienating people because I don't think I'm special. And I don't want to come off that way. I don't think other people that, I don't want to divide anybody. I think that what this is going to take all hands on deck, regardless of dogma or political proclivities, etc. But I think all right. I guess I got to open the barn door. I think humanity has been sold a damaged bill of goods. I think we have aspects of our history that were obscured on purpose because they couldn't be explained. I am not one of those people who is completely distrusting of government or authority, because I've seen a certain amount of how it works, or I've climbed high enough the ladder to know at least how far I trust the system, and I trust it a great deal. I've had the opportunity to meet people who've held high station and have really interesting conversations with them, and found them to be very sincere, caring individuals who are willing to dedicate their life to others. And that's what really gives me the confidence to say that I think that our government did the best they could. I think that our government, our society, our culture, I don't know how far back you want to take it, but there was something that they tried to protect us from, or they thought that we needed to be shielded from, but I don't think they were ever able to understand it or control it on their own. And that triggers people. Secrets trigger people. Nobody likes being told that they don't have a need to know, or that they wouldn't understand. But I don't think a lot of people want to be told that that there's a possibility that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 on any given day of the week, or that man, it really boils down to what I call a fear versus love dynamic, and that gets really woo-woo for some people. But I spent a lot of time in a fear dynamic as a law enforcement officer, as an anti-terrorism officer, as an active duty military member. I spent a lot of time really leaning forward, looking for where the threat was, looking for noises in the shadows, and ready for a fight. And a lot of us live our lives that way. And the confidence that comes with realizing that you don't have to have your dukes up all the time opens up a great deal more of your perception. When we can use the analogy of when we're hunting, and even if most of us are living in an urban area and we don't interact directly with nature for nourishment, we know what we're talking about when hunters are locked on to the environment, to the prey, and to the other predators that are in the area, to the gravitas of the weapons they're carrying, and they're not hearing anything that isn't related to that task. And so a lot of us who are living in a survival mode, who are in a low-level fight or flight, who tune into the news every night, regardless of what flavor you want to take it in. Not thought-provoking, and it's not something that makes you sit up and raise your chin. It's something that makes you lean forward and tuck in and look over your shoulder and wonder who's standing next to you to fight with you. So this is so far out of most people's worldview. And to be completely honest, again, there's so much of this that overlaps with various things that people who are diagnosed with certain mental illnesses, things that occur in their consciousness. That begs the question, at some point, is it about how you perceive the things that are occurring in your consciousness? I don't have all the answers on that, but I've retreated from a lot of conversations on Twitter that I was enjoying being involved in, because at some point everybody wants to plant their flag in what it is. And a couple of days ago, I finally was able to put into words what I wanted to, and everybody wants to call the phenomenon one thing, and I don't believe this is one thing. I believe that this is many, many, many different things that are intersecting via a shared medium. I think that shared medium, whether it's the dimensionality that they're transiting through, or the frequencies that they're using or that they're appearing in, it seems to be affecting people in consciousness. It seems to be overlapping for some people. Um, the correlations between eyewitness accounts, when you finally take the stigma out of it and say, what if, just for speculation today, all these were real? Let's take them all and let's add everything up together and see what sticks. There are a lot of things that line up. And I don't believe that there is a single dogma, philosophy, story, book, period, out there that anyone can hold up and go, yep, it was here all along. That's going to offend a lot of people. I mean, I'm really skirting the issue here, but I think religion is part of the phenomena seen through the lens of culture and through regional morals. I believe that a person in Xinjiang, China, is not going to perceive the same thing as a person in Namibia or a person in Brazil. And I believe that they're going to interpret that through their own cultural lens, through the cultural lens of their dogma, their parents, their village, their city. So at the end of the day, it leaves us really relying on each other and needing to trust each other.
And by what you just said, do you mean that if somebody from another country saw the Nimitz encounter, saw a Tic-Tac going into the water, they may say this is a spirit, and not put it in the same verbiage that we're using, but be describing the same phenomena?
Yes. And that's an excellent way to put it, because an example would be many of the witnesses that Luis and I spoke to down in Baja. At one point in the conversation, we say, what did you think it was? And almost everybody kind of, hems and haws a little bit, but it's always, a lot of people talk about them. They think it's something else. But they also talk about the fact that their grandparents told them about it, and their great grandparents. And some of the people that we spoke to, one of whom was the founder of a very prestigious fishermen's association in Ensenada, a group that has provided livelihood and nourishment to the community for decades. And these people have been going out into, we can call them ancestral fishing lands for decades, if not a century. They're reticent to talk about it at times. They're not going with their story to the media, but they see this all the time, and they see the most spectacular things. And I don't think it's fair to just pepper the conversation with the stuff they see if I can't turn around and provide video or a better account of it. But needless to say, what they see underwater is such a variety of incredible bioluminescent and large phenomena going back as long as you can think. But even more astounding is the fact that the fishermen at Guadalupe Island go out every morning and check their traps. And on any given day, a 6 or 8 foot diameter silver basketball, as they describe it, might pop up out of the water next to their fishing boat and seemingly do one of these. And they can't describe why it's doing that, because it's just a silver thing, but they have that feeling.
That it's checking them out.
Totally checking them out. Just doing a real quick, what's this thing up here? And then going, okay, zip, and they're gone. And I had the chance to describe my sighting at almost each turn that we interviewed someone. Luis made sure that we connected what we had experienced and felt with what they had experienced and felt. We wanted them to know that we weren't just we're not just investigators coming down here trying to get hard data. We're human beings, and this matters to us. This matters a great deal to us. This is, in my opinion, the greatest mystery that we're ever going to encounter. Period. It's spectacular what we can learn when the stigma is removed. When the fear is removed, and when people are able to approach this with open-minded speculation. I mean, you see how reticent I am, but also there are folks out there that are going to take what I say as gospel. So I have to be really careful how I word things. But there's so much we can all learn if we're all just a little more brave. And I just ask people to think about your dreams, and imagine if someone said to you that like you said earlier, gun to your head, prove to me you've had a dream. You know, I don't like to call anybody out, but let me pick a monolithic figure to pick on. Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Mm-hmm.
Put the two of us on a stage. Prove to me you've dreamt, with no other witnesses to help, with no data to back it up, just through your anecdotal life. It's almost impossible without me leaning forward and going, I know, me too. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we have to start. And I still feel the stigma. You know, have you seen a ghost? You know, what does that have to do with UFOs? Well, maybe you're comfortable going, hey, think you ever seen a ghost? Maybe you need to open up the conversation somewhere else. But get it into the weird that we've all seen, because we've all seen something weird.
I agree. That was awesome. Thank you, Sean. I want to get to Utah because that's what a lot of this channel is focused on right now, mainly because this was the channel that we exclusively broke the Utah UAP story on. Purely serendipitous. The way that happened was my roommate went to college with Sam Shortek, who was one of the drone pilots, actually the producer of the documentary, working alongside Jimmy Chappie, who was the drone pilot. They were out in Beaver shooting B-roll for this documentary, captured unknowingly this UAP, only discovered it after the fact while they were playing back the footage, just piecing through everything to make sure the drone footage came out okay. Saw it, showed the team, everyone went pale as a ghost, and they sat on this thing for years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this happened back in 2016. I found out about it about a year ago. I've been living in Brooklyn with one of the best friends of Sam Shortek, my friend Scott. So Scott tells me, yo, dude, my buddy Shortek's in the city this weekend. You've got to check out this UFO video he has on his phone. And I'm like, okay, don't even think anything of it. He gets to the city over the weekend. He's he's talking about some of the video production he's been working on. I'm like, holy shit. Scott said you have a UFO video. Like, what's that all about? He opens his phone. He says, you're one of the only people who's seen it outside of my closest group of friends. So just like whatever you do, don't tell too many people. He said it's something that we've kept secret for a reason. It's something that freaked us out when it happened. We obviously knew a lot of people would be interested in it, but we just thought it was not the type of thing we wanted to go public with. They didn't see any positive attention coming from it.
You don't want to be that guy.
Right. And both of these guys are, while they are in the video space, they're not really, trying to make a name for themselves as content creators. I mean, they're both doing projects, but they're mostly doing client services, and they're not, going outside of corporate projects right now. So just venturing into the paranormal world, I think, was something they saw as off-brand and potentially actually damaging to their client relationships.
Sure.
So, for a lot of reasons, they decided not to go public with this. I saw it on the phone, and I couldn't believe that he hadn't shown anyone because, I don't even watch a ton of UFO videos, but it was by far the clearest that I've ever seen. And I didn't know anything about its authenticity or what it was actually footage of, but I knew it was definitely the clearest I'd ever seen. So I spent probably 2 or 3 weeks just talking to Sam, trying to convince him to go public with it and trying to explain that, what's the worst that can happen. The New York Times just went public with officially declassified videos that, are showing potentially the same thing. And if the government and the Pentagon are investigating this and they're taking it seriously, I think this is important evidence that other people should look at and at the very least consider. So
I completely agree.
So we convinced him to go public with it. And we just did a basic interview like this, but I didn't even have Skype. I didn't even have a microphone. So we just talked on speakerphone. I did a quick time recording, talked about his experience. We showed the footage for the first time. I think you were potentially one of the early YouTube people who saw this video.
I think I was one of the first 50 or so. I'm not sure how it got to me that quick. I can't remember I think it was one of my friends actually who stumbled upon it. But yeah, yeah, I'm excited. This is fun.
And can you tell me what you remember when you saw it, how you saw it, what your reaction was?
I flipped. Um, and I'll back up because you said something important. You said, what gave you confidence was the New York Times article. Um, I got a call from a Master Chief friend of mine the day that article came out. I stopped watching the news and listening and reading about, I stopped reading the New York Times a long time ago. I was very much in my own world. And he's like, bro, that thing you told me about in '04 is on the front page of the New York Times today. And some guy from the CIA has the video you told me about. He goes, it's the exact same thing. So when you say I get it. Because that day I was like, it's all real. Let's go. When I saw the video of the Utah UAP, my jaw hit the floor. And the very phrase I said is, that's a frickin' Tic-Tac.
Mm.
And I hesitated. The last time you and I talked, I was brand new to this and I didn't know where my confidence was. But the first thing I thought when I saw it too, again, because this people are going to pick this up. This is a theme in our conversation. I still don't believe that the Utah UAP are human beings. But the first thing that I thought was, that's a frickin' Tic-Tac and that's a human being driving it. And the reason I said that was because of the way that it was hugging the terrain. Because I just did a quick calculation. I think there was, you guys, I'm not sure if you narrated over it yet or if there was a good block of info, but I knew that it was archival drone footage taken for possibly survey or just B-roll for a project.
Yeah.
You've got a drone that's just going, and they're just going through the B-roll, which now I realize when you have nothing else to do, you just look at B-roll and hope that there's something worth it in there.
Yeah.
And they got it, and that there was no reason, given how fast that thing was going. And of course, we broke it. My friends and I broke it down, did back of the envelope calculations, came up with around 11,000 miles an hour was what we came up with. I think that we weren't completely accurate with what some other folks have come up with, but that's pretty close. It's definitely hypersonic velocity, I think. But the way it was terrain hugging down that mountain and through the valley and everything else said two things to me: that it was avoiding radar, and given its technology, it didn't have to. And it sure looked fun. And it made me think of what Commander Fravor said when he said, I don't know what it is, but I want to fly one, or I want to drive one. Right. And it just, all I thought of was Commander Fravor behind the stick on that thing and how he would have drove it if he had a chance. Mm. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that only human beings enjoy joyrides. But it blew my mind, Brian. And I really want to dig into it with you now. It's incredible where it's the area that it's in, how it correlates to research of other personnel or other people like David Politis. I'm curious to hear where people speculate its course and trajectory was headed. Mm. Because your UAP is sticky to me.
Wait, you broke up for 1 second. Say that one more time, Sean.
I said your UAP is sticky to me. I don't like picking it up. It sticks to me. Why was it so low? Mm. Those two things. So if it had been, I don't know. I don't know why that sticks for me. But the fact that it's coming out of the Badlands, in a completely uninhabited area that's near national parks, and that it's headed in the general direction of Groom Lake in general, I find really interesting. I just find it really interesting, and I want to know more about it. So,
what do you know about Groom Lake? Is that where Bob Lazar says he saw test flights?
If I recall what Bob Lazar has has testified about. He worked at a place called S4, which was a test range that was part of the greater Groom Lake complex, but south. And there's a lot of lore and legend with that, of it being underground and hidden, etc. I don't have a clearance anymore. I can't say for sure what goes on out there, but I throw to the experts like Steve Justice, etc. Who will say absolutely classified aircraft and programs are go on in that vicinity. But I believe that if Mr. Justice thought that this was us and was able to tell us, that would have been done a long time ago. Mm. I believe if this was us, that would be the quickest and easiest thing for us to say and to prove and to gain something from. I mean, the United States of America, regardless of where you stand on who we are as a nation right now, wouldn't lose anything by saying that we possessed godlike technology that could conceivably defeat any foe. Unless we really don't, and we don't want to invite anyone to test that, I suppose. But
right,
that's, that thing is a 40-foot long silver hypersonic bus with a window in the front of it.
Do you think it was 40 feet long?
That's my feeling looking at it, is around 40 to 45 is what I'm feeling. 36. It's based on that. Do you perceive that windscreen? Do you perceive that window in the front of it?
I was going to ask you what you meant by that, because aside from thinking it's just the clearest footage ever, and aside from finding the banking turn to be really peculiar and unlike even what a bird could do. Yeah. And, I've zoomed in so far and frozen it so many times to just try to find one flap of the wings, because I thought of all the debunkers, the best possible counter argument was that maybe it's some sort of bird and that the drone, distorts the effect, or that the lens flattens the effect and distorts the paradox or the parallax. But I've never seen a flap. I've never seen any characteristics of a bird. And then when it gets super close and you freeze it, the first thing I see is a windshield.
Yeah.
And I don't just see it in one frame. I see it in at least 3 frames. And when it's closer and it starts to blur out, you can still see something in the front of it that's darker than the rest of it. Looks like glass. Looks like a cockpit. And it's pretty distinguishable, like I said, in a series of frames. So I don't know if that leads you to believe that this is something that's piloted.
But yeah, I do. So I showed this to you when we took a break earlier, and I'm gonna do something a little cheesy and put my phone up to the camera. Hopefully, it won't be too blurry. But those are pictures of stills from when the Utah UAP came out, and they've got green lines, yellow lines, and red lines drawn in there by some of my colleagues. The day that we saw it, even one of my colleagues, even on his iPhone, put it into iMovie, put it into slow-mo, and started breaking down frames. We started talking about how it was moving down the mountain. I not trying to be a hipster, but long before you talked about it, going behind the trees and the ridgeline and et cetera, we were cluing on the exact same stuff, and it was really great to watch your show or watch your channel and watch your analysis, and to see that you were picking up that all of this was just as obvious to us. When you and I were talking about the Tic-Tacs earlier, and when we were talking about the antenna, and that struck both of us as being kind of like jerry-rigged, yes. I suppose. Like you're trying to find your way around something. Today, for the first time, that made me think of when people ask me how I got interested in UFOs, I always tell a similar story to what Tom DeLonge says, because I remember similar books and similar fascination from when I was a child. But I remember that the UFO that was on the cover of the book, that was the one that got me into it, was a flattened kind of a saucer, but it had a spike on the top with like just a really cheesy, like Tesla coil looking type antenna. And I've always thought that the pictures that had the ridiculous like antenna sticking out of it, I remember immediately thinking, well, aliens wouldn't need that. I have no idea why why I would think that, because I have no basis for what aliens need and don't need. But the more I think about it, the more I go back. If the universe is as big as it is, let's pretend for a minute that every clear photograph that isn't obviously a hubcap or or some kind of light fixture is actually a UAP. Mm-hmm. A lot of them have antennas. That's all I can. It's not a mic drop, but a lot of them seem to have antennas. There's decades and decades of testimony of eyewitnesses stating that large craft hung there in the sky with sometimes they think they saw humans, sometimes they think they saw non-humans, seemingly just peering out at them and observing them through glass. I mean, it's almost like one of those neat rotating restaurants just started hovering over the area and observing people. So the idea that there would be a window in the front and beings controlling it doesn't bother me.
Would you see any reason for a window or a windshield if there weren't beings in it, if it were autonomous? Like
no,
a UAP?
Unless that were a I mean, strangely enough, I could grab one of my TV remotes and show a similar type infrared sensor on the front of the remote. So could it be some kind of sensing device for a autonomous craft, or goodness forbid, an AI craft? It could. I mean, until that thing lands and we get to walk around and talk to who's controlling it and check it out, you know, it's all speculation. Sure. But
can I ask you, of your colleagues that you showed this with, was this anyone from ATIP? Do you know if Lou Elizondo ever saw this particular video?
I do not. So I don't. My colleagues and I, we talked to Lou about quite a few things, but I don't. It's hard to put it this way, but I don't treat Lou like MUFON. Lou's my friend, and if there's something I can't work out on my own, I'll ask him. But I also know that. Let's just put it this way. I'm never going to ask him a single question that I believe that he may know that he's not allowed to tell me. So if I don't already know it, and if he already hasn't shared it with me, then I assume that it's either not mine to know or doesn't exist. I just have to make an assumption that the head of ATIP has more information than me. I think we would all be silly to think that he didn't. But that doesn't mean that information is going to change anything right now, I think. I can say that from my own journey through this, as open-minded as I thought I was at the beginning, if you took my worldview today and tried to explain it to me the day after the New York Times article came out, I would have shut you down, and I don't even think I would have watched the show. So it's nuanced.
What resemblance do you see between the Utah UAP and the Tic-Tacs?
Shape. So there's a portion of the. Now I know that Commander Fravor got a really good look at it, and his wingman got a really good look at it. We got a really good, or wingman pilot rather, and we got a pretty good darn look at it in infrared and in invisible on the FLIR pod. But when it moved, there was more of a sense that one side was bigger than the other, that there was a bulbous end and a tapered end. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if this is an affectation of or a change in a morphing of the structure of the craft as it changes from one mode to another, perhaps. That's pure speculation, but what I see on the FLIR video when the Tic-Tac leaves frame, which we're told by eyewitness testimony was when it booked. It just took off. I see the same thing coming down the mountain in Utah and shooting across the screen. And I personally refer to it, I refer to the Utah UAP as the slug, because that's how I classify the shape of it. I've drawn it a couple of times. I don't have it handy, but to me, it's a silver lozenge of a slug that is larger in the front and tapers toward the rear in a vague aerodynamic fashion.
You're exactly right about that shape because I've drawn it on pizza boxes, and that's exactly what it looks like.
It's a UFO bus,
Mm-hmm.
is what it reminds me. And I was listening. I can't remember where this was today because I take so much in now. But I was listening to some witness testimony that were describing I think it was down in Mexico, and it was someone else's testimony, possibly on YouTube, that was just running in the background. But they said it was like a VW bus. And I remember going, wow, that sure reminds me of the Utah one. It reminds me of a VW bus. Mm-hmm. But what have you gotten out of it?
I wanted to share a screen. I have a few windows open in my browser. I just wanted to show you some, if you want to call it research, just kind of things I'm looking into. Okay. Have you heard about this guy, Ben Rich? He was the CEO of Lockheed Martin.
I have.
So I guess the journey kind of starts there. I'm reading about Ben Rich, Lockheed Martin, obviously responsible for the Works program. And I couldn't help but notice the proximity between a lot of the Lockheed Martin headquarters or facilities where they're building sort of top secret military weapons and where this Utah event happened. So I guess just a few things to touch on Ben Rich's history. So in addition to being the CEO of Lockheed Martin, working on Skunk Works, working on some of the earliest stealth aircraft in our history, he said some really curious things, including in 1993. He stated that we already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do, he said. We now have the technology to take ET home.
Yeah, I remember that.
He said a lot of really interesting things, and I found an article talking about, his company, Lockheed Martin, opening an office in Hill Air Force Base, which is in northern Utah. I actually looked into the jobs they're hiring for right now. They have 52 openings at that exact base in Utah, and they're pretty cryptic, pretty high-level descriptions, but these are mostly engineering jobs. Sounds like working on hardware, weaponry. So I wanted to look just where Hill Air Force Base is, and it's just north of Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, it's right next to Dugway Proving Ground, which is another site of sort of, military technology development, mostly black projects. Also right next to the Utah Test and Training Range. Mm. So, I'm just kind of now diving into each of these. It's strange to me that you have three sort of top secret military bases so close to each other. I started reading that, Utah's where the Army learns to fly drones better. And so not only is the FAA moving towards testing new sort of drone prototypes in Utah, but the military is already actively doing this. So according to this article, Dugway Proving Ground is the Army's primary testing center for unmanned aircraft systems. And so a lot of the systems that we're deploying in the Middle East right now, these were actually tested right over here in Dugway Proving Ground in northern Utah. Interestingly, so we've got Lockheed Martin based here, 52 current job openings. Let's see.
They're looking for filmmakers?
I wish. Yeah, I would love to infiltrate, but I think they'd find the YouTube videos. It's another interesting one. So Utah, this is from long before the Utah video was ever taken. So this is from 2013. Utah's offering several sites for potential FAA study. And it lists a bunch of potential sites. One is outside of Milford. So I was talking to Sam Shortek, who shot the Utah video. He immediately recognized Milford because Milford is right about where Beaver is, where they shot the video. So here's Beaver, where the Utah video was shot. Right next to it is Milford. And Milford is apparently where some of these top secret drones were going to be tested. If you look at the distance between Milford and Beaver to, let's see, Utah Test and Training Range, pretty close. Dugway, pretty close. Hill Air Force Base, pretty close. And if you kind of imagine something flying from, let's say, Hill Air Force Base down, let's say, to Dugway, you could imagine that in a continuous path, it would eventually cross somewhere around Beaver. So it just led me to believe that maybe, this is related to the proximity of these facilities where they just so happen to be creating top secret, top of the line weapon systems to get the drone momentum going early, which I guess few states did. So it kind of puts Utah in unique territory there.
That's very interesting.
Right? So like Utah is kind of like an anomaly, and I just learned that. So then I just started looking at sort of weapon systems that look something like Utah. And to me, I don't know if to you, there's just something about this one that does.
Yeah.
And this is a
seen face on that, as well as the the B-2 and any other flying wing.
Yeah.
Absolutely looks lenticular. It looks saucer shaped.
Right.
Which has always blown my mind. Yeah.
Exactly. And so then there's the whole thing. So Ben Rich, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, he claimed, or at least allegedly claimed, that some of these technologies were not our own. That we did reverse engineer these. And so it is possible, I think, that what we witnessed in Utah was U.S. technology, but potentially not invented by us originally, maybe just reverse engineered. But I couldn't help but see similarities between this craft, which is called the X-47B, I suppose, and it's made by a company called Northrop. The more I read, it sounds like Northrop, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin are always kind of involved in the mix. And if
Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, BAE, et cetera, are many of them are they're the contractors that the U.S. government relies on for weapon systems, et cetera, Raytheon and all that. So the cast of characters that always gets thrown into this is you got the right folks.
Right. So check this out. So the same company, Northrop, they if I'm saying that correctly, they also
Northrop.
They also just opened a facility in Utah, and they're working on similar drones. They have this PR, run here, talking about Mitt Romney coming out to sponsor this event. So it was like a big high stakes thing in Utah. But this company's, partnering with our government to create these weapon systems just like Lockheed Martin. And so I looked up, where are these guys based? Northrop.
You got a big deal phrase in there that the phenomena has, I'll dare say, proven to interact with. And that's his next generation ICBM program. So I think your logic is solid. I think your investigatory instincts are completely sound. But the wrench I would throw into this is, folks, we've already proven they're interested in our weapon systems.
Right.
So they seem to go where we're trying to figure out how they do what they do. So that's one of the things that I always feel like there's a duality to this.
Is there anything in our inventory that you know about that's technologically possible today that displays characteristics similar to what we saw in Utah and what you saw off the coast of California?
No. I don't think that it is. I won't say that it's impossible. I don't like when people say that things that are unknowable are impossible. This could be the Easter Bunny. I don't know. But, I wouldn't even take the Easter Bunny off the table. But I feel so honored to have got to spend time with Deep. He's the CEO of Reactive Q, an amazing company, amazing startup up in Canada that's working on AI and quantum computers and things that are. I don't even like using the word quantum, because I think that if you don't have a PhD, I almost don't even think we should use the Q word, because so many people like to apply it like a magic wand to everything. But he made it pretty clear to me the energy expenditures that it takes to move a Tic-Tac. And I want to say that he leaned over and clinked glasses with me just to watch my mind blow when he told me that it would take something like 10,000 SpaceX rockets to equal the thrust, for lack of a better word, or to equal the speed that the Tic-Tac exhibited. And you and I can apply that directly to the Utah UAP. We're talking about an energy expenditure on a magnitude that would power cities for extended periods of time. Now, I lose a certain demographic of people I talk to who immediately get angry and start talking about withheld technology, how that could benefit the environment, people, hunger, world peace, etc. And I don't deny any of that, but I just don't think the world works that easy that when somebody finds something out, they run out in the street and scream it to everybody. We have secrets we want kept. We have the recipe for chemical weapons, the manner of enriching uranium to get plutonium to make nuclear weapons, lots of other stuff. We don't want that to just be in the public library and with easy links to get the stuff from Amazon. So if we're talking about technology that controls the arrow of time, that moves at hypersonic velocities, that you don't even need nukes anymore. A kinetic weapon moving at that speed will destroy a good portion of a city. A kinetic weapon is just a rock, a crowbar,
Just going that fast.
A can of Coke moving at a good fraction of the speed of light. When I say a good fraction, let's talk 3 or 4%. The energy expenditures are ridiculous.
What types of propulsion
don't even
systems?
have any physics.
What types of propulsion systems that you're aware of are capable of achieving, let's say, 10,000 miles per hour, if that's conservative for how fast Utah was going? I guess we don't have a speed on the Nimitz UAP, do we?
I don't know. I've stayed away from the technical aspects of that because if I can't do the math myself, I won't usually quote it. But I don't recall escape velocity for Earth. I want to say it's up in the tens. So yeah, we do have things that will go that fast. But think of the Saturn V rocket. Think of how much that thing weighed, how tall it was, and how much material went into that to literally take 3 guys and a buggy, up into low Earth orbit. Most of the heavy work, all of the heavy work was done getting into orbit. I played Kerbal Space Program on my last deployment, my twilight tour, while we were at sea, or when I didn't have active, when it was my time off. I basically explored the entire solar system and learned how to fly a spacecraft up into orbit and everything else in a limited fashion on a computer game. And I got to know really well just how much it takes to get into orbit, because it took months for me to figure out how to get into orbit properly. It wasn't easy. And that Tic-Tac, the Utah UAP, what some of these basketball-sized drones are allegedly doing, they run circles around our entire military. They run circles around human military. So on another note, let's look at it this way. Everything you and I have seen that we speculate might be American is in the public eye. So let's just throw a BS number on that and say that if we see that much, then foreign intelligence services of major nations probably see an even bigger chunk of relevant information out of that.
Fair enough. Actually, it reminds me, I want to show one more thing. So this same drone we were looking at actually got taken down in Iran. I forget. I didn't read the whole story. It either got shot down or crashed. I think they may have disabled. They might have wired, foiled its radar and caused it to crash. But this little guy here that I think looks kind of like what we see in Utah is this Northrop drone that, was top secret. I guess we were testing it or we were spying in Iran, went down. So now they have it. So I can only imagine, if we YouTubers are picking this shit up, that foreign intelligence is far, far ahead.
Right. Right. And you can assume that if Iran has that's been shared with the USSR, or excuse me, just dated myself there with Russia.
Right. Yep, that's scary.
And you can assume that if it was shared with Russia, that it's been leaked to the People's Republic.
Oh yeah.
So, and I'm not in the military anymore. I'll always have a martial sense to how I look at the world. But I don't feel like we live in a world that's on the brink of war anymore. I'm one of those people that, whether you agree with me or not, I look at the whole of humanity. I think this is the best time to be alive. I know that there's injustice. I know that there is a lot of room to get better. But I also feel like at this point in human existence, there are so many more of us, and we all have so many more opportunities to succeed than we ever did before. It's hard to tell that to someone who's living in a threatening environment. So I'm not trying to take away from anybody else, but I still think this is the most beautiful time to be alive, even if it's confusing the hell out of a lot of us.
You mentioned your Nimitz experience in the aftermath. Nobody really talked about it. No one really discussed it, short of sending around an email chain. Yeah. Likewise with Utah, the video, the raw footage surpassed 1 million views. One of our narrated clips reached 1 million views. No mainstream media coverage whatsoever. Right. Like none, not even local media picked it up. So we found that kind of odd. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, if you feel like this is the kind of thing people didn't want to talk about.
Well, I've been reticent to talk about your UAP because even though right now I'm confident to say, I don't think it's us. That's still, I don't want to put a percentage on that. Your investigatory data looks pretty sound to me. It shakes up my view on it a little bit, and even some of the things you showed me with those drones shakes me up a little bit. The air intakes on the front of those. Now I can't tell you why a hypersonic slug would need an air intake if it doesn't have control surfaces. You got to tell me. But all right, let's pretend, because I don't have a yes or a no on this. But let's pretend that in 1947, for example, something crashed. And that we retrieved something that wasn't humans we know about. Okay, let's just put it that way. So it could be that or anything beyond. And that we've had all that time since then to try to reverse engineer that. Now let's forget the whole cultural part of there's stuff that we can't control that's stronger than us that's out there, and we just can't tell the voters that. That puts. How are you ever going to take that panic away? I don't know how you ever would. So I get why. But let's just set that aside for a second. Let's say they had 70 plus years to work on this, which is what everybody wants to tell us, and what a lot of the circumstantial evidence would even lead to. Now, if that's a cover story, it works out great for everybody involved. And if it's the truth, the cover story works great for the truth too, because it's too fantastic. Let's pretend the Utah UAP, let's pretend the Tic-Tac UAP are human reverse engineered technology. Excuse me, that we reverse engineered something that we retrieved from someone else. It's not inconceivable that we would have figured out a lot of it over the years and not all of it. It's not inconceivable that we might have figured out how to fly without wings, but not without air intake.
Or antenna.
It's not conceivable. It's not inconceivable. I mean, how did we get... I know a lot of people who understand aerodynamics and aircraft would be able to explain this in a minute, but for your layman, how do you get from not being able to fly a flying wing? Because if you know what the Germans in the United States went through trying to get a flying wing to work, and what it took to finally get the B-2 to work, it's pretty ridiculous what they had to go through. It's like, why would you even waste that much time trying to get this lousy thing to fly? We have things that fly better. Mm-hmm. What if they're technology test bed platforms? What if there are rumors out there that the B2 involves anti-gravitic technology? Now, but you can't turn anywhere in the private sector and even prove that anti-gravitics or electrogravitics are even a real thing. They fall into esoteric research. They fall into mysterious research, and it's covered with the woo-woo stuff and the crack pottery. That all lends very conveniently to something that you want covered up. We have to be honest about that. So at some point, I believe there will have to be a reckoning between our current special programs and the phenomenon and the truth. But I think that it's unfortunate that so much of what may be ultimately behind the origins of this are so fantastic. We just can't get there this week.
That was awesome. That was a natural ending in itself. I don't want to stop because I'm having a great time, but it's been 2 hours.
Okay. I really like talking to you, man.
No, I really like talking to you. I think we could do another one another time if you'd be down.
I'd be down anytime. I really enjoyed that so much, and I trust you, man.